sky was suddenly inside the airplane. At 24,000 feet above the Pacific Ocean, the roof of Aloha Airlines Flight 243 ripped away in an instant. Wind roared through the cabin with impossible force. Passengers looked upward and saw nothing but blue Hawaiian sky where metal had been moments before. In the chaos, veteran flight attendant Clarabelle CB Lansing disappeared. Yet somehow, the damaged Boeing 737 was still flying. If stories like this matter to you, the ones history almost forgot, consider subscribing to Final Seconds. New stories drop every week. On the afternoon of April 28, 1988, Aloha Airlines Flight 243 departed Hilo on the island of Hawaii for the short scheduled flight to Honolulu. It was a familiar route flown countless times every day across the islands. On board were 89 passengers and 6 crew members aboard a 19-year-old Boeing 737-200 that had spent years making frequent inter-island flights in a warm, humid, salt-rich environment. Few people expected anything more than a routine journey, lasting less than an hour. Captain Robert Schornstheimer occupied the left seat, while First Officer Madeline Tompkins handled duties beside him. In the cabin, veteran flight attendants attended to passengers as they always had, helping families, greeting regular travelers, and preparing for what should have been another uneventful flight across paradise. After takeoff, Aloha Airlines Flight 243 climbed normally. The weather presented no significant hazards. The aircraft leveled at 24,000 feet and continued smoothly toward Honolulu. Then, at approximately 1:46 p.m., everything changed within a fraction of a second. A violent explosive decompression tore through the airplane. Approximately 18 feet of the upper fuselage, just behind the cockpit and extending over the passenger cabin, separated from the aircraft. The ceiling vanished. Insulation, wiring, and pieces of aluminum disappeared into the sky as the cabin was suddenly exposed to the open air. The blast was so powerful that Clarabelle Lansing, who had been standing near the forward cabin, was swept out of the aircraft. Despite extensive searches, she was never found. 7 passengers and another flight attendant suffered serious injuries from debris and the violent decompression. Everyone else fought simply to remain seated as hurricane-force winds filled the cabin. Inside the cockpit, the crew immediately faced a nightmare unlike anything in normal airline operations. The deafening noise made communication almost impossible. Warning lights illuminated across the instrument panel. Loose debris struck the aircraft. Critical flight instruments remained available, but the crew could not fully determine how badly the airplane had been damaged behind them. Captain Schornstheimer declared an emergency and turned toward Kahului Airport on the island of Maui, the closest suitable runway. The aircraft began an emergency descent. During the descent, another complication appeared when the left engine failed after sustaining damage related to the structural breakup, forcing the crew to continue with only one operating engine. Even so, maintaining control of the airplane became their highest priority. Behind the cockpit, surviving flight attendants continued caring for frightened passengers despite their own injuries. With much of the cabin roof gone, everyone remained exposed to freezing temperatures, deafening wind, and the terrifying sight of open sky above their heads. Oxygen masks had been deployed, but the violence of the airflow made movement extremely difficult. Seat belts kept many passengers from being thrown upward or against damaged sections of the cabin. As the aircraft descended toward Maui, structural damage continued to threaten the flight. The crew had no certainty that the fuselage would remain intact long enough to reach the runway. Every control input had to be made carefully to avoid placing additional stress on the weakened airframe. Finally, Kahului Airport came into view. Captain Schornstheimer guided the crippled Boeing toward the runway, while emergency vehicles raced into position below. The landing was firm but controlled, as the wheels touched down safely. The greatest danger had finally passed. Against extraordinary odds, Aloha Airlines Flight 243 had survived an accident many believed impossible to survive. Investigators from the National Transportation Safety Board later concluded that the accident resulted from widespread fatigue cracking and disbonding in the fuselage lap joints. Years of repeated pressurization cycles, combined with corrosion in Hawaii's marine environment and shortcomings in inspection and maintenance, allowed structural damage to grow unnoticed until the fuselage failed catastrophically. The investigation also identified deficiencies in maintenance oversight and led to significant changes in inspection requirements for aging aircraft. The damaged Boeing 737 was never returned to service. It was dismantled after the investigation, but the lessons from Aloha Airlines Flight 243 continue to shape aviation safety decades later. Airlines around the world introduced more rigorous structural inspections for aging aircraft, particularly those operating frequent short flights that experience many pressurization cycles. Engineers also improved methods for detecting hidden fatigue cracks before they could become deadly. Today, Aloha Airlines Flight 243 is remembered not only for the shocking image of a passenger jet flying without much of its roof, but also for the professionalism of a flight crew who refused to surrender, the courage of cabin crew who protected others even as disaster unfolded around them, and the lasting reminder that aviation safety is built one lesson at a time, often written in the lives of those who never returned home. As firefighters, medical teams, and airport personnel reached the aircraft, they were met with a scene few had ever imagined. The Boeing 737 stood on the runway, missing a large portion of its upper fuselage, exposing rows of seats to the open air. Despite the extraordinary structural damage, most of the passengers had survived an event that aviation experts would later describe as almost beyond belief. Emergency crews moved quickly to assist the injured, while ensuring everyone else was safely evacuated from the aircraft. The emotional impact became clear almost immediately. Passengers who had remained remarkably calm during the emergency now struggled to process what had happened. Some embraced family members waiting at the airport. Others simply sat in silence, overwhelmed by the realization that they were alive. Many later recalled seeing daylight where the ceiling should have been, and believing the airplane could not possibly remain in one piece. The greatest loss was flight attendant Clarabelle CB, Lansing, a respected member of Aloha Airlines for many years. She had devoted her career to protecting passengers. During the explosive decompression, she was swept from the aircraft and never recovered despite an extensive search over the Pacific Ocean. Her death remains the only fatality directly resulting from the accident, a heartbreaking reminder that even when disaster does not claim hundreds of lives, its human cost can still be immeasurable. The surviving cabin crew also earned widespread recognition. Even after suffering injuries themselves, they continued checking on passengers and maintaining as much order as possible under conditions that few people could imagine enduring. Their professionalism reflected years of training, but it also reflected remarkable courage during an emergency unlike anything contained in a standard checklist. Within hours, investigators from the National Transportation Safety Board arrived in Hawaii alongside specialists from the Federal Aviation Administration, Boeing, and Aloha Airlines. Because so much of the aircraft's upper structure had separated during flight, investigators carefully documented every remaining section of the fuselage. Pieces recovered from the accident site were examined for evidence of fracture patterns, corrosion, and metal fatigue. Their investigation eventually revealed that the failure had not been caused by severe weather, sabotage, or an onboard explosion. Instead, it developed slowly over thousands of flights. Each time the aircraft climbed to cruising altitude, cabin pressurization placed stress on the fuselage. Each descent relieved that stress. Over nearly 2 decades of intensive island hopping service, those repeated pressure cycles gradually weakened parts of the aircraft's skin. Investigators found widespread fatigue cracking around the fuselage lap joints, where large aluminum panels overlapped and were bonded together. Corrosion, accelerated by Hawaii's warm marine environment, had further weakened the structure. Tiny cracks that were difficult to detect during routine maintenance eventually linked together, allowing a catastrophic structural failure to occur once the remaining metal could no longer withstand normal pressurization. The investigation also examined maintenance practices and inspection procedures for aging aircraft. Although the airplane had undergone required inspections, the methods available at the time were not always capable of identifying hidden damage developing beneath bonded joints and layers of metal. The accident demonstrated that aircraft operating frequent short routes could accumulate pressurization cycles far more rapidly than airplanes flying longer distances, creating a different pattern of structural aging than many maintenance programs had anticipated. Those findings prompted significant changes throughout the aviation industry. Inspection requirements for older transport aircraft became more rigorous. Airlines adopted improved techniques to detect fatigue cracking before it became dangerous. Regulators introduced additional programs focused specifically on aging aircraft, recognizing that calendar age alone was not the only measure of structural wear. Flight cycles, the number of takeoffs and landings, received even greater attention when determining inspection intervals. Manufacturers also expanded research into structural durability and damage tolerance, leading to improved inspection technologies and maintenance standards. The lessons learned from Aloha Airlines Flight 243 influenced operators around the world, helping prevent similar failures before they could occur. Captain Robert Schornstheimer and First Officer Madeline Tompkins were widely praised for their disciplined handling of the emergency. Faced with incomplete information, overwhelming cockpit noise, and a severely damaged aircraft, they focused on the fundamentals of flying. Their decisions gave everyone on board the greatest possible chance of survival. Their actions, combined with those of the cabin crew and emergency responders, transformed what could have become one of the deadliest structural failures in aviation history into a powerful example of professionalism under extraordinary pressure. Decades later, photographs of the aircraft still capture immediate attention. An airliner with much of its roof missing appears impossible to imagine, let alone capable of landing safely. Yet behind those unforgettable images lies a deeper lesson. The accident was not simply about a damaged airplane. It was about constant vigilance, the importance of learning from failure, and the responsibility shared by manufacturers, regulators, maintenance teams, and flight crews to protect every life entrusted to aviation. Today, every inspection of an aging airliner carries part of the legacy of Aloha Airlines Flight 243. Every technician searching for the smallest crack, every engineer refining inspection methods, and every crew preparing for an emergency benefits from lessons purchased at an enormous human cost. Clarabelle Lansing never returned home that afternoon. Her colleagues did. 89 passengers were given another chance at life. And because investigators refused to stop asking why the fuselage failed, millions of travelers since then have flown aboard safer aircraft. Sometimes the most enduring memorial is not made of stone. It is found in the quiet confidence that an airplane climbing into the sky has learned from the past. Every crash leaves behind more than wreckage. It leaves behind a story that deserves to be told. If this one moved you, subscribe to Final Seconds and never miss another. The next story is already waiting.